Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri. Normally, I interview military veterans about their civilian career. My goal is to recreate kind of a coffee catch-up type format where different people who had served in the military can share what they do for a living and how they got there, and advice for other veterans seeking to go into that functional role, career, or follow in their footsteps in some way. This is part of a new series I'm calling Skills Episode. This is Skills Episode number 6. And today we're going to be talking about needs and the needs that are met on active duty and the needs that are going to be unmet as veterans go through a transition to a civilian career. And this is a bit of a follow-up of one of the first skills episodes I did that was on something called nonviolent communication. In that episode, I talked about a different tool set where you can better uncover the feelings that you have about a particular topic, the needs underneath it, and then come up with strategies to meet those needs. And it's been a really valuable tool set to have in my personal life, in my marriage, as well as in team working environments. This is a slightly different and I think a much simpler version of that, and it's actually something that is put out, or I'm not sure if originated by, but I learned through Tony Robbins, and it's called the 6 Basic Human Needs. The reason I wanted to talk about this today is that in the reprogramming seminar that I'm running, we talked about this as a framework to understand what someone is getting out of the military, and more importantly, a framework for understanding the unexpected that might come with the transition to the civilian landscape. And my intention in going through this is that if you know about that, if you know the needs that are unmet as you leave the military, if you can anticipate that, it can make the transition smoother. It can help you identify where you might struggle and proactively find resources to meet those needs. And if you're already out of the military, if you well into your civilian career, I think this is also a really great framework to have. I apply this in interactions with other people and just try my own decision making. I will put a link to, there's a 30-minute episode that I heard recently that revisited this, and in it Tony Robbins goes through in his own framework, or in his own wording, this framework, but I'll share it in my own terms, some of it borrowed from him, some of it my own experience, and then more specifically, how someone on active duty or a veteran can apply this framework in their life and in their career. So with that, we'll dive into this. So we're going to go through, first of all, in terms of format here, we'll go through the 6 basic universal human needs. And then we're going to talk about which of those needs are most commonly met in the military. And then we'll talk about which needs are going to not be met. And then we can talk about what to do with all this. So the first need of these 6 is certainty. We all, as human beings, have some need for certainty, to know what's going to happen, to know what's to expect, to know that the world around us and friends are going to be there, that family is reliable, that we have a meal, that we have shelter. All of these human needs are met by our desire for certainty. The next need is the opposite of this, because if everything was always the way we expected it, we'd go crazy. So we also have a need for uncertainty. We have a need for surprises. We have a need for the unknown, for exhilaration, from that rush of not knowing what's going to happen next. And in some way, shape, or form, we all have a need for uncertainty. The third need is around significance. And we all have this need to feel significant, to feel valued, to feel held in esteem. And there are many strategies to meet that need for significance, but at a base layer, all human beings have this need for significance. The fourth need is love or connection. Every human being, no matter what your culture, what your nationality, we all have in some way, shape, or form a need for love and a need for connection with those around us. And again, many different ways to meet that need, and we'll talk about that. But the basic need there is just a connection and or love with others. And then the last 2 needs, these are Tony Robbins calls this more of like a higher or more spiritual needs, but that's a need for growth, a need to feel like we're moving forward, that we're learning, that we're progressing, that we're getting stronger, that we're getting smarter, we're getting faster. And then lastly, a need for contribution, meeting that need that we are giving back in some way, that we are making a positive difference, that we are helping others. So those are the 6 basic human needs: certainty, uncertainty, significance, love, connection, growth, and contribution. And one of the other things that Tony talks about that I think is interesting is that if we all will prioritize these needs differently. Like there's times in my life where the most important thing to me was certainty. There was a lot of just crazy stuff going on, and I really needed certainty. And so I prioritized that I would do anything to get certainty. Oftentimes, significance plays that number one role. And I just really want to feel valued. I want to feel like other people look up to me. And my behavior is very different when my primary need that I'm trying to meet is significance versus certainty. And then one of the things that Tony talks about is that if you ever meet 3 or more needs with the same thing, that's usually something that will become an addiction. So, for example, I think a lot of people can use, and I certainly have in my life, can use alcohol to meet many needs. First of all, from my experience, if I drink a lot of alcohol, if I get drunk, I'm certain that it's going to be a crazy night. Like I'm certain that, I'm going to be having fun. I'm certain of what that experience will be. So in many ways, alcohol will meet, first of all, my need for certainty. And second of all, it's going to meet my need for uncertainty, right? You throw enough alcohol in a situation, you have no idea what's going to happen. You go out with some friends, you have a crazy time, you're looking for uncertainty, you're looking for that wild time and unpredictable nature. And very often, many of us will meet that need for connection with alcohol. If we go out drinking, we go to a bar, it can meet that need for connection with others and that sense of camaraderie. And so that's a case where meeting the need for certainty, uncertainty, love, and connection, alcohol has a potential to be very addicting for us because it meets so many different needs with this single substance or this single activity. An example I'll borrow from Tony Robbins is he talks about, a member of a gang, if he pulls out a gun on you in an alley, that person now is meeting a need for significance. At that point in time, they are the most significant person in your life, right? You're staring down a gun at this person. They've now become incredibly significant. It meets their need for uncertainty. They have no idea how you're going to respond. They have no idea what you're going to do. There's that rush and adrenaline that floods them with that uncertainty. In some way, they're getting a need of connection met, where in that moment, in some sick way, they have a deep connection with you because you both are now in this moment where you are both fully present and there can be that connection met. And they also meet a need for certainty. Pulling out that gun, they are certain that they are going to get a response from you. They are certain that they're going to be significant in your life. So they're meeting their 3 or 4 different needs. It can be a very addicting behavior. So, from the interviews that I've had with veterans, my take is that there are 4 very strong needs that are met for most people who serve in the military. And the first need, one that I didn't really fully recognize while I was on active duty, but in retrospect for sure, it was meeting a need for certainty. I had certainty in so many different ways. I had a guaranteed income. I had job security. I had a lot of certainty on, when I chose submarines, there was a pipeline. I know exactly more or less what my career will look like. I know the different points at which I can be promoted. When I get to the boat, I know with certainty the steps I need to take to get qualified as engineer officer of the watch, as officer of the deck. I have certainty of everyone has their different role. These are my electricians. These are the auxiliary. There's so much certainty. I have certainty around my finances, around medical, around so many different areas that I took for granted. But it is a major need that is met for members of the armed forces, whether they recognize it or not. That at least is my observation from my own experience and from these interviews. A second need that I think is met for many people, myself included, from being on active duty, was a sense of significance. I was taking an oath to protect my country. Yeah, that is something that I'm thankful that at this point in time we put a premium on. We really value and respect men and women who have the courage to do that. And for many of us, I think that meets a need for significance. We know that we matter to our country. We know that we matter to our shipmates, squad mates, the people in our platoon. We matter to the person standing next to us. We have a strong sense of significance. And just by the very nature of military hierarchy, the longer you stay in, the more significant you become. A third need is love and connection. And the connection that I had with the people on my submarine, that camaraderie, that unit cohesion, that's something I don't think I will feel outside of the military. It met in a tremendous way that need for connection. Moving to a new area, living there, not knowing anyone, and then instantly having this group of people with shared values, with a shared language, it in a major way met my need for connection and for love. And then lastly, and I think that this is one that I don't think I realized while I was on active duty, it is probably the most reoccurring need that I've heard expressed from guests on the show that have been met by the military is a need for contribution, that need to give back. And I can think of no higher form of contribution than those who take this oath, who agree to put their personal life and needs and families aside to serve, protect, and defend their fellow countrymen. It is an incredible sense of contribution. And so those are the 4 needs of these 6 that I think are really met with the military. And for many of us, many people that I've interviewed on the show, it also does meet that need for uncertainty, particularly those who serve in more tip of the spear activities and more frontline activities. That is an incredible, I imagine it's an incredible, and I've heard it's an incredible rush of uncertainty and just not knowing, and just really, I think of the people who are pilots, that's an immense amount of uncertainty in what they're doing, and that can also be a need. So that's 5 different levels of growth, and in some sense needs met, and in some sense growth as well. But I'd say mainly certainty, significance, connection, and contribution. And what I find interesting from my own transition and from all these 125 plus interviews I've done at this point with veterans is that the moment that you leave the military, the 2 needs that you are really meeting in a major way and often unexpected way is uncertainty and growth. You go from an environment where you had so much certainty, where you are now just plunged with maybe 1 week of TAPS training, plunged into a new environment where you don't know anyone, you don't know the career progression. There is so much uncertainty. Where you're going to get paid, where you're going to live, functional roles, industry you're going to choose, individual companies. There is no limit to uncertainty. And especially in contrast to the certainty that I was used to and most veterans are used to, it can be like this splash of cold water or slap in the face, this unexpected, just overwhelming sense of uncertainty that nearly every person I've had on the show has commented on in some form of language about the amount of uncertainty and ambiguity and discomfort that comes at that transition. And then the other need that I think is, you're going to experience in a major way when you transition is this need for growth, where literally every step you take, everything you do is going to be about growth. You're learning a new language, you're learning resumes, interviews, attire, you're learning about behavior, you're learning about different roles, you're learning about different industries. And if you think back to when you were last a civilian and you entered into the military and went through some form of boot camp, a lot of growth happened in a very short amount of time. It's incredible, the military training regiment and their experience programming civilians to become warriors. And so when you first entered the military, if you think back, there is so much growth that happened in a 1 or 2 or 3 month time period where you're learning to salute and learning to wear a uniform and learning sir and ma'am, and you're learning all these different acronyms and you're learning so much. I think back to my plebe summer at the Naval Academy, and I just remember thinking at 9 a.m. in the morning, I'm like, man, this is more than I would have done before by in an entire day, and it's only 9 a.m. And you think of all that growth that occurs. And from the interviews I've had, it's just as much growth that happens when you transition to the civilian sector, but the difference is there is not the structure. There's not the hand-holding that really helped a lot of us. Maybe it seemed like a negative way to do it with a lot of the yelling and all of that structure, but there was still structure surrounding that growth opportunity. And that's the biggest thing missing, is that it's kind of growth now with uncertainty. And so the reason that I give this framework, particularly for those who are on active duty, is I think it's really important to realize that there is very little overlap in the needs that are met initially while you're on active duty and initially when you transition to a civilian career. You start with certainty, significance, connection, and contribution, and in that immediate moment of transition, it goes to growth and uncertainty. And the reason I think this is important is if you recognize this and you buy into it, you can anticipate this and you can start to see how can you meet this need. As an example, I know that my need for connection, this universal need we all have, is going to take a hit. I'm not going to have my crew around me. I'm not going to have my team around me. Maybe I'm moving to a new geographic area. So how can I meet that need for connection? Maybe I can, set up a weekly call with some friends or some family. Maybe I can move to an area where I at least know some people. Maybe I can get plugged into a church group or some sort of social activity. I can use meetup.com to meet new people. Maybe I can go to school or graduate school and instantly have at least some form of connection accessible. Or maybe check out the resources, interviews I've had on the show with Team Red, White, and Blue or the Travis Manion Foundation, or so many great organizations that exist to help veterans connect with each other and with their community. This is also an argument to be made for continuing with the reserves. That allows you some form of community as you enter this unknown environment. That's just one example. Another, though, is contribution. So many veterans I've had on the show were surprised, were really blown away when they got out to realize, man, what is my purpose? What is my mission? I didn't even realize it, but my life's mission for so long was the military. It was protecting my country, and I felt so great about that contribution. And now I don't have that. So find your next forum to do that. Anticipate that. Find Habitat for Humanity. Again, the Travis Manion Foundation. Find a way to volunteer. There's a lot of great organizations I've had on the show that are about volunteering and giving back. And that might be a way. It's not meant to replace the connection. It's not meant to replace that sense of contribution you had on active duty. But I'm just saying to anticipate it so that it's not as much as a vacant spot in your life. It's not as much as an empty hole. And same thing with certainty. You had so much certainty in the military. You're going to have a lot of uncertainty. Are there ways to have more certainty in your life? Maybe that's by working to build up your savings and having 6 months where you don't have to work. And yes, that's a far cry from having a steady paycheck, but you've at least got certainty that for the next 6 months I'm okay. And that's going to offset that uncertainty. And significance too, you take that uniform off, you take off that part of identity. How do you meet that need for significance? How do you meet that need for recognition? I think that can be bridged in a lot of different ways. You'll have to find the one that works for you. But maybe, like for me in grad school, it's getting involved in different clubs, different organizations, starting to have a new identity. Maybe it is volunteering. Maybe it is being a big brother or a big sister and having significance in someone's life. Maybe it's finding some way to make a difference, to volunteer, and maybe that in some way meets your need for significance. So I will put in the show notes a link to the podcast where Tony Robbins does a much more eloquent job of explaining this. I do imagine this might not resonate with some of you. I hope for many of you it does. I know for me, it is a simplified version of the nonviolent communication I talked about in an earlier episode, and it's just easy. Sometimes I will I will recognize like, oh man, I'm feeling really pissed off right now. I'm feeling really anxious. Okay, like what's going on? What are my needs right now that are not being met? Oh, all right, I just feel like really overwhelmed. I'm in a startup. There's so much uncertainty. There's so much ambiguity. Maybe I need a little bit more certainty in this moment in my life. Not all the time, but maybe just right now. What's something that's certain? Going to a movie. I love going to the movies. That's a way I'm certain that I'm going to have a good time. It's just finding ways in the moment to see what need is not being addressed that you really need to prioritize. And then once you do that, I often find, things calm down and you can operate and you can figure out things a little bit more. But when you're in that crisis mode and you might not know why, this might be an effective framework to really quickly parse through what can be, these unknown feelings and thoughts and just ideas and beliefs, and just kind of narrow in, apply a very simple framework to make sense of it all. Hope this helps. Would love any thoughts in the discussion section on the show notes. If you have questions, if you have reactions, responses, alternate viewpoints, I'm open to all of it. There is the discussion portion. I use a company called Discuss. It's in the footer of the show notes. Put them there. I will do my best to respond as soon as possible and look forward to getting a dialogue going there. One last plug, if you haven't had a chance to leave a positive review on iTunes, would greatly appreciate that. I'll put a link on that in the show notes as well. And if you haven't signed up for our mailing list, definitely do that. Lots more information coming through the mailing list. I'm sending no more than 2 newsletters a month right now, so try not to overwhelm you with that. Check it out, and I will be back very soon with more interviews with veterans about their civilian career.